The courthouse doors hadn't even closed behind me when my phone started ringing. 14 missed calls, 23 text messages. My daughter's voice on the last voicemail was shrill, almost unrecognizable. "Mom, what have you done? What have you done?" I stood there on the marble steps, feeling the weight of the manila envelope in my hands, and I thought about how we'd gotten here. How the woman who'd spent 37 years putting everyone else first had become the villain in her own family's story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months to when I still believed that love and sacrifice were the same thing. 3 months earlier, I was standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, the way I had every morning for decades. The coffee maker hummed its familiar tune. Sunlight streamed through the window over the sink, catching the dust motes in the air. Everything looked normal. Everything felt wrong. My name is Eleanor, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew exactly who I was. Mother of 3, grandmother of 5, wife to Richard for 40 years, the woman who hosted every Thanksgiving, remembered every birthday, kept the family together through sheer force of will and an endless supply of homemade cookies. I lived in a comfortable home in Charlotte, North Carolina, in one of those tree-lined neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone and people still wave from their porches. Our house was the one with the wraparound porch and the swing that creaked just right. The one where the grandkids ran through the sprinklers every summer and left their bikes on the lawn. That morning I was making Richard's breakfast the way he liked it. 2 eggs over easy, bacon crispy but not burnt, wheat toast with just a scrape of butter. 37 years of the same breakfast, and I could do it in my sleep. I'd perfected every detail over the years, learned exactly how he wanted his coffee, how much orange juice to pour, which plate to use. It was a choreography I'd memorized so completely that my hands moved on autopilot while my mind wandered elsewhere. The bacon sizzled in the pan, filling the kitchen with that smoky aroma that used to make this house feel like a home. Now it just smelled like routine, like obligation. I watched the fat render and crisp, thinking about how I'd been doing this exact thing for longer than my children had been alive, longer than some marriages lasted. This breakfast ritual had outlived friendships, jobs, versions of myself I could barely remember. I flipped the eggs with practiced precision, watching the yolks settle perfectly in the center. Such a small skill, such an insignificant accomplishment. Yet I'd spent decades perfecting it because Richard liked his eggs just so. Not too runny, not too firm. The edge of the white had to be slightly crispy but not brown. It was a ridiculous thing to have mastered, and yet here I was, 40 years later, still performing this tiny act of devotion that had long since lost its meaning. "Morning, Elle," Richard said, not looking up from his phone as he sat at the kitchen table. He'd gotten that phone 2 years ago, and I swear he'd barely looked at me since. "Morning, honey. Sleep well?" I set his plate in front of him, waiting for the small smile, the little acknowledgement that used to make the routine feel like love. My hands lingered on the edge of the table, hoping for something. A glance. A thank you. Anything. He grunted, still scrolling. The blue light from his screen reflected off his reading glasses, and I could see the rapid movement of his thumb, swiping, tapping, completely absorbed in a world that didn't include me. I stood there for a moment watching him eat. He never looked up. Never acknowledged the effort, the early morning, the perfectly cooked eggs. It was as if the plate had simply materialized in front of him, conjured by magic rather than created by hands that had been doing this for decades. I told myself it was fine. Marriage evolves, right? After 40 years, you can't expect fireworks every morning. That's what I'd been telling myself for longer than I cared to admit. But standing there in my own kitchen, watching my husband eat the breakfast I'd made without even acknowledging my presence, I felt invisible, like I'd become a ghost in my own life, going through motions that nobody even noticed anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from my eldest, Michael. "Can't make Sunday dinner. Got plans." Then another from my daughter, Jennifer. "Same, Mom. Sorry, busy." And finally my youngest, Daniel. Me too. Rain check? 3 kids, 3 identical excuses, all within 2 minutes of each other. I stared at the messages, feeling something twist in my chest. Sunday dinners had been sacred in our family for decades. It was the one time we all came together, no matter what. I'd planned this week's menu already, bought the groceries, prepared the special dessert that Jennifer loved. All of it suddenly pointless. I'd spent 3 hours yesterday making Jennifer's favorite lemon meringue pie from scratch, the one with the extra tart filling she'd loved since she was 8 years old. I'd hand-squeezed the lemons, whipped the meringue until my arm ached, toasted the peaks to that perfect golden brown. It was sitting in my refrigerator right now, a testament to love that nobody would eat. "The kids can't make it Sunday," I said to Richard, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Mm-hmm," he said, still not looking up. "All 3 of them, at the same time." "They're busy, Elle. They've got their own lives." He said it like I was being unreasonable for even mentioning it, like wanting to see my own children was an inconvenience I should have outgrown by now. The way he said it, so dismissive, so casual, it made my hands shake slightly as I poured my own coffee. But I smiled. I always smiled. That's what I did. That's who I was, the accommodating one, the understanding one, the one who never made waves or caused problems or had needs that might inconvenience anyone else, or who I thought I was. You know that feeling when something's off, but you can't quite name it? Like when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking just a beat too quickly. I'd been feeling that for months, maybe longer. Every family gathering felt staged somehow. Conversations would halt when I entered a room. My daughter-in-law would exchange glances with my sons that I couldn't decipher. Last month at Michael's birthday party, I'd walked into the kitchen to refill the chip bowl and caught the tail end of a conversation. Jennifer had been saying something about timing and when to tell her, but they'd all gone silent the moment they saw me. When I asked what they were discussing, Jennifer had laughed it off, said they were planning a surprise for Richard's upcoming birthday. But Richard's birthday wasn't for another 6 months, and the look on their faces wasn't the conspiratorial excitement of people planning a celebration. It was something else, something that made my stomach clench. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, getting older, more sensitive. Richard said I was imagining things whenever I brought it up, and I believed him because, well, why wouldn't I? This was my family, the people I'd built my entire life around. That afternoon, I did what I always did. I went to the community center where I volunteered 3 days a week, helping organize meal deliveries for homebound seniors. The irony wasn't lost on me later. There I was, making sure elderly people had food and companionship, while I was slowly starving for connection in my own home. "Eleanor, you look tired," Mrs. Patterson said as we packed boxes. She was 83, sharp as a tack, and had a way of seeing right through people's masks. Her weathered hands moved efficiently, but her eyes never left my face. "Just a busy morning," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. I'd gotten so good at that forced brightness over the years. It was like a costume I put on every day, and I'd worn it so long I'd almost forgotten what my real face looked like underneath. Busy or troubled? She stopped packing, giving me her full attention in a way that made me want to cry. I paused, hands full of canned vegetables. "Is there a difference?" She looked at me with those knowing eyes that had seen 8 decades of human behavior and could spot a lie from a mile away. "Usually, yes. But in your case, I suspect they're the same thing." I didn't answer, couldn't answer, because admitting that something was wrong felt like betraying my family, even in the privacy of my own thoughts. I'd been raised to believe that you didn't air your family's dirty laundry, that you protected your people no matter what, that loyalty meant suffering in silence. Mrs. Patterson set down the can she was holding and reached across the table to touch my hand. "Eleanor, I've been doing this kind of work for 60 years. I've seen a lot of people in a lot of situations. And I've learned to recognize when someone is carrying a weight they shouldn't have to bear alone. I'm fine, I said automatically, the words as rehearsed as a prayer. Are you? She tilted her head, her gray eyes searching mine. Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a woman who's been giving pieces of herself away for so long. She's forgotten to keep anything back for herself. The accuracy of her observation hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears prick my eyes and blinked them back furiously. I couldn't cry here. Not at the community center, not in front of Mrs. Patterson. If I started crying, I might never stop. That evening, Richard had another meeting. He'd been having a lot of meetings lately. Business stuff, he said. Investors, opportunities, expansions. Our landscape architecture firm had done well over the years, built up a solid client base. But lately, he was always in meetings I couldn't attend, taking calls in other rooms, spending hours locked in his home office. Don't wait up, he said, kissing my cheek in that perfunctory way that made me feel more like a roommate than a wife. His lips barely brushed my skin, and he was already turning away before the contact ended. I watched him grab his keys, check his phone, straighten his collar in the hallway mirror. All these small preparations for wherever he was going, whoever he was meeting. None of them included me. I wanted to ask where he was going, who he was meeting, when he'd be home. But I'd learned years ago that asking questions made me seem needy, suspicious, untrusting. So I swallowed my curiosity and my concern, and I smiled as he walked out the door. I sat alone in our living room, the television playing something I wasn't watching. The house felt too big, too quiet. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, each one stretching longer than the last. I looked around at all the photos on the walls, decades of smiling faces, and wondered when exactly I'd become a stranger in my own life. The photos told a story I barely recognized anymore. There was our wedding photo, both of us so young and full of hope. Richard's arm around my waist, my head tilted toward his shoulder, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. We'd been so poor back then, so in love, so certain that we could build something beautiful together. Pictures of the kids as babies, toddlers, teenagers. Michael's gap-toothed first-grade photo. Jennifer in her ballet recital costume, all pink tulle and missing front teeth. Daniel at his high school graduation, tall and proud and full of potential. Family vacations to the beach, Disney World, the Grand Canyon. Graduation photos, wedding photos, grandchildren's birth announcements. A whole life documented in frames, frozen moments of happiness that felt increasingly disconnected from my current reality. When had the smiles become performances? When had the love become transactional? My phone buzzed again. Jennifer, my only daughter. My baby, who I'd rocked through colicky nights and walked through her first heartbreak. Mom, can we talk about Thanksgiving? I called her immediately, grateful for the connection, for someone wanting to talk to me about something. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? There was a pause, long enough to make my stomach clench. I could hear voices in the background. Her kids arguing about something, and then a door closing as she moved to somewhere quieter. We're thinking of doing something smaller this year, just our immediate families. But we are your immediate family. The words came out before I could stop them, sounding more hurt than I'd intended. You know what I mean, Mom. Jake's parents want to host, and with the kids getting older, it's getting complicated, trying to be everywhere. She was lying. I could hear it in her voice, that slight uptick at the end of her sentences that she'd had since she was 7 years old and swore she hadn't eaten the last cookie. I'd been her mother for 35 years. I knew every tell, every tiny inflection that signaled dishonesty. Jennifer, what's really going on? Nothing's going on. Mom, we need some space to do our own thing. You understand, right? I didn't understand. Not at all. But I said yes anyway, because that's what I did. I made things easy for everyone else. Of course, honey. Whatever you need. The words tasted like ashes in my mouth. Whatever you need. How many times had I said those words? How many times had I pushed down my own feelings, my own needs, to accommodate everyone else? After we hung up, I sat there in the dark, and for the first time in my adult life, I let myself acknowledge the truth I'd been running from. Something was very, very wrong. And the worst part? I had no idea how deep the betrayal actually went. I should have trusted my gut. You probably want to shake me right now, tell me to wake up, to see what was right in front of me. But here's the thing about being in it, really in it. You can't see the forest for the trees. And when those trees are the people you love most in the world, you'll convince yourself they're wildflowers instead of warning signs. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. Richard's side was cold, the sheets barely disturbed. He'd come home late and left early, a pattern that had become so normal I'd stopped questioning it. I reached across the mattress, my hand landing on the cool cotton where his body should have been. When had I stopped expecting warmth there? I made coffee in the silent kitchen and sat at the table where we'd raised our children, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I'd imagined growing old, surrounded by love. The morning light didn't feel warm anymore. It felt exposing, like it was illuminating all the cracks I'd been plastering over with hope and denial. My phone rang. Michael, my eldest son, the one I'd put through business school by working double shifts as a nurse while Richard built the company. I'd been so proud of him, of his success, his beautiful family. I answered immediately, always eager to hear from my children. Mom, we need to talk about Dad. My heart stopped. Is he okay? Is something wrong? My mind immediately went to the worst places: heart attack, accident, cancer. That's where a wife's mind goes after 40 years. No, he's fine. It's just... Look, Mom, Dad's been under a lot of stress with the business. We all think maybe you should take it easy on him. Stop asking so many questions about where he is, what he's doing. Give him some breathing room. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. Michael, I barely see your father. How could I possibly be asking too many questions? You know what I mean. You can be kind of intense sometimes, needy. He said the word like it tasted bad, like he'd been holding it in for a while and was relieved to finally spit it out. Needy. The word hit me like a slap. 37 years of putting everyone else first. And I was needy. I thought about all the times I'd canceled my own plans to babysit his kids. All the money I'd lent him that was never repaid. All the hours I'd spent helping him study for exams, edit his papers, celebrate his achievements. And this was how he saw me. Needy. Michael, who told you to call me? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Was it your father? Another pause. I could almost hear him recalibrating, deciding how much to admit. We've all noticed it, Mom. Dad's just... He needs support right now. Not interrogation. Interrogation? The word came out sharper than I intended. I asked him last week where he was going to dinner. That's interrogation? See, this is what I mean. You're getting defensive. You're making this about you when it should be about supporting Dad through a difficult time. I felt like I was losing my mind. Here was my son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, telling me that wanting basic information about my husband's whereabouts was unreasonable, that expecting to be included in my own marriage was needy. Did your father ask you to call me? I repeated. Silence. Then, we're all just concerned about him, Mom, and about you. Maybe you should think about getting out more, finding some hobbies. You've made us your whole world, and that's not healthy. After he hung up, I sat there shaking. Not with sadness, not yet. With something else. A creeping realization that the story I'd been telling myself about my life, my family, my purpose, might be complete fiction. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made. How I'd deferred my own dreams of becoming a nurse practitioner to support Richard's business ambitions. How I'd moved away from my aging parents in Virginia because Richard got a better opportunity in Charlotte. How I'd been the one to stay home when the kids were sick, to miss my own mother's funeral because Jennifer had the flu and needed me. That memory hit me fresh, even after all these years. My mother's funeral. I'd been packed and ready to drive to Virginia when Jennifer called, her voice weak and miserable. She had a fever, she said. Jake was out of town for work. The kids needed me, and I'd unpacked my suitcase, canceled my plans, and driven to her house instead. I'd held my daughter's hand while she slept, brought her soup and ginger ale, entertained her children while she rested, and I'd missed saying goodbye to my own mother. I hadn't been there when they lowered her casket into the ground, hadn't stood with my sister as we said our final farewells to the woman who gave us life. Later, I'd learned that Jake hadn't been out of town for work. He'd been at a golf tournament. Jennifer had known. She'd lied to me because it was easier than finding a babysitter, easier than letting me go to my own mother's funeral. And I'd never confronted her about it, never asked why my needs always came last. I'd just swallowed the hurt and told myself it was what mothers do. We sacrifice, we give, we put ourselves last. And I'd done it all willingly, gladly even. Because I believed that's what love looked like. That sacrifice was the same as devotion. That if I just gave more, tried harder, loved bigger, everything would be okay. You've been there, haven't you? That place where you're running yourself into the ground, and everyone around you acts like it's not only normal, but expected. Like you're not a person with needs and dreams and limits. You're a resource, an endless well they can draw from without ever wondering if it might run dry. I'd been learning about something in my volunteer work, something the social worker at the community center had mentioned. She talked about how exploitation happens in stages, how first they gain your trust by being exceptional, making you feel valued and loved and necessary. I later learned that experts identify phase 1. Caregivers gain trust by being exceptional at first. That's exactly what happened. In the early years, Richard treated me like I was his everything. The kids adored me, needed me, made me feel like I was the center of their universe. And then, gradually, so slowly you don't notice, the dynamic shifts. Your value becomes tied to what you can provide, not who you are. Your worth is measured in service, in sacrifice, in silence. I'd become so good at being what everyone needed that I'd forgotten how to be myself. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the park where I used to go before I had kids, back when I was just Eleanor, not somebody's wife or mother. There was a bench overlooking a small pond where I used to sit and read, dream about the future, imagine all the possibilities ahead of me. The park had changed. There were new playground structures where the old swing set used to be. The walking path had been paved over, but the bench was still there, weathered and worn but solid. I sat down and felt like I was visiting a grave, mourning a version of myself that had died so long ago I'd forgotten she ever existed. I sat on that bench and I tried to remember who that young woman was, what she wanted, what made her happy, and I couldn't. The memories were there, but they felt like they belonged to someone else, some other Eleanor who existed in a different lifetime. I remembered fragments, a dream of going back to school, getting my nurse practitioner license, maybe working in pediatrics, a desire to travel, to see Italy and Greece and all those places I'd read about, a version of myself who painted watercolors and wrote poetry and had opinions about things beyond meal planning and laundry detergent. Where had she gone? When had I stopped being a person and become just a function? A young mother walked by pushing a stroller, and I watched her with a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to warn her, don't lose yourself. Don't let them convince you that your dreams can wait. Later never comes. But another part of me envied her, envied the belief she probably still held that love and sacrifice were noble, that motherhood was its own reward, that she could have it all if she just tried hard enough. I'd believed that once. I'd been that young mother, pushing my own stroller through this very park, dreaming about the future while my present slipped away moment by moment. My phone buzzed, a text from Daniel, my youngest. Mom, can you lend me $5,000? Investment opportunity? I'll pay you back next month. Not, how are you? Not, I miss you. Not even a proper greeting, just a request for money, delivered with the casual expectation that I would say yes, because I always said yes. I stared at the message, and something inside me cracked, because it wasn't the first time. Daniel had borrowed money from me 6 times in the past 2 years, always with promises to pay it back, never with actual repayment. Each loan was for something urgent, something that couldn't wait, some opportunity that would change everything. Michael had borrowed $20,000 3 years ago for his daughter's private school tuition. Jennifer needed help with a down payment on her house. Richard constantly needed injections into the business for this expansion or that equipment upgrade. I'd been dipping into my own retirement fund, the money I'd inherited from my parents, for years, helping, supporting, sacrificing. My mother had left me that money with specific instructions. Use this for yourself, Eleanor. Promise me, for your future, your security. Don't let anyone take this from you. And I'd promised, standing by her deathbed, holding her frail hand. A promise I'd broken over and over, each time telling myself it was for the family. It was for a good cause. It was what she would have wanted. But she wouldn't have wanted this. She'd seen something in my marriage, in my relationship with my kids, that had worried her. She'd tried to warn me, gently, carefully. "Don't lose yourself, sweetheart," she'd said. "Don't become so small that you disappear." I texted back, "Can we talk about this in person?" "Kind of time-sensitive, Mom. Need an answer by tonight." My hands were shaking as I typed, "I'll think about it." His response was immediate. "Seriously? It's just $5,000. You act like I'm asking for a kidney." Just $5,000. Like it was nothing. Like money grew on trees. Like I hadn't worked 50-hour weeks for decades to build that savings. Like I wasn't 62 years old, with retirement looming, and almost nothing left in accounts that should have been full. I turned off my phone and sat on that bench until the sun started to set, watching ducks glide across the pond, and I let myself think thoughts I'd been pushing away for too long. What if they didn't love me? What if they loved what I could do for them? What if I'd spent 37 years building a life that only existed in my imagination? What if I was completely, devastatingly alone, surrounded by people who carried my last name? The scariest part wasn't the questions themselves. It was that I already knew the answers. I'd known for a while. I'd just been too afraid to look directly at them. When I finally got home that night, Richard was in his office with the door closed. I could hear him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. I stood outside that door, my hand raised to knock, and I hesitated. Something told me to listen, to pay attention, to stop being so trusting. Then I heard him say, "She doesn't need to know, not yet. We'll handle it when the time comes." The words were muffled through the door, but clear enough. She. That was me. What didn't I need to know? What were they handling without me? I pressed my ear closer to the door, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid he'd hear it. I know, Richard continued, but if she finds out now, she'll make everything complicated. Just give me another few weeks to move the rest of it, and then we'll deal with her reaction. Deal with my reaction. Like I was a problem to be managed, not a partner to be consulted. And just like that, the last piece of my denial crumbled into dust. I walked away from that door and up to our bedroom, and I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth, all of it, no matter how much it hurt. Because sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can set you free, even when it destroys everything you thought you knew. The next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to details I'd been ignoring. I started asking questions I'd been too afraid to voice. And most importantly, I started looking at my own bank statements. That's when everything began to unravel. I'd always handled our personal finances, but Richard managed the business accounts. Or so I thought. What I discovered was that there wasn't as much separation as I'd believed. Our retirement accounts, the ones I'd been contributing to for decades, were listed as business assets. My inheritance from my parents, which I'd carefully saved in what I thought was my own account, had been moved into a joint trust where Richard was the primary executor. Little changes, made over years, that I'd signed off on without reading the fine print. Because I trusted him. Because that's what you do when you love someone. Or what I thought you did. I spent hours in the public library, printing out statements, making spreadsheets, tracking where money had gone. The picture that emerged made me physically sick. I had to excuse myself twice to go to the bathroom, where I sat in the stall trying not to throw up, trying to breathe through the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. Over the past 5 years, nearly $400,000 had been transferred out of accounts I thought were secure. Some went to the business, some went to the kids, some went to places I couldn't identify, mysterious transfers with vague descriptions that meant nothing to me. My retirement fund, the one I'd built through 30 years of nursing, was almost empty. The inheritance that was supposed to secure my future, gone. Money my parents had worked their entire lives to save, money they'd left to protect me, evaporated. And I'd signed for all of it, believing I was helping my family build something together. You know what the worst part was? It wasn't the money. It was the realization that they'd all known. Every single one of them had watched me drain my future dry, and not one of them had said, "Mom, maybe you should keep something for yourself." I was sitting at the library computer, staring at numbers that made my vision blur, when Mrs. Patterson found me. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" She set down her own stack of books and came over, her face creasing with concern. I looked up at her, and whatever she saw in my face made her pull up a chair. She didn't say anything else, just sat down next to me and waited. That simple act of silent support made my eyes sting with tears. "Tell me," she said simply. And I did. I told her everything. The money, the evasiveness, the feeling of being squeezed out of my own family. I told her things I hadn't admitted to myself, watching this woman I barely knew outside the community center become the only person who seemed to see me as a human being. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She reached over and turned the computer screen toward her, scanning the spreadsheets I'd created, her lips pressing into a thin line. "How much do you have left?" she asked finally. "About 30,000 in an account they don't know about. My emergency fund." I'd opened that account years ago, something my mother had insisted on. "Every woman needs mad money," she'd said. "Money that's just hers, that nobody else knows about, just in case." Just in case of what? I'd wondered at the time. Now I knew. "Then here's what you're going to do. You're going to protect that money, and you're going to find out exactly what's been done with the rest. Because, Eleanor, what you're describing isn't just family drama. This is financial exploitation." The word hit me like ice water. Exploitation. Not helping, not supporting. Exploitation. "They wouldn't," I started, but she cut me off. "Wouldn't they? You just told me they've systematically drained your accounts while convincing you it was for the greater good. That's not love, sweetheart. That's abuse." I wanted to argue, wanted to defend them. But sitting there in that library, with the evidence literally in front of me, I couldn't. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was papery thin, spotted with age, but her grip was strong. "I'm going to give you a number. A lawyer who specializes in elder financial abuse. And before you say you're not elderly, the law considers anyone over 60 vulnerable to this kind of exploitation. You need to protect yourself. I can't afford a lawyer. I don't have any money." The irony of the statement hit me even as I said it. "You have $30,000. Use some of it to save the rest of your life." That night, I lay in bed next to my husband of 40 years, and I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. He came in late again, smelling like whiskey and cologne I didn't recognize. He kissed my forehead in the dark, and I pretended to be asleep. How had we gotten here? When had the man I fell in love with, the one who used to bring me wildflowers and dance with me in the kitchen, become someone I was afraid to confront? I thought about our early years, how hard we'd worked together to build our life, how he'd supported me through nursing school while working 2 jobs, how we'd scraped by in that tiny apartment, eating ramen and dreaming about the future. Somewhere along the way, those shared dreams had become his dreams. My dreams had been filed away under later, and later never came. I'd given up my identity so gradually I hadn't noticed it happening. First it was practical. Someone had to stay home with the babies. Then it became habitual. I was better at managing the household. Then it became expected. This was my role, my purpose. And somewhere in there, I forgot that I was supposed to have a life of my own. The next morning, I called the lawyer Mrs. Patterson had recommended. Her name was Diana Chen, and her voice on the phone was kind but professional. I was sitting in my car in a parking lot 2 towns over, paranoid that somehow Richard would overhear me even though he was at the office. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to ask you some questions that might be uncomfortable. I need you to answer them honestly." For the next hour, I laid out my entire financial history. The inheritance, the retirement accounts, the loans to the kids, the business investments. She listened without interrupting, taking notes. I could hear her pen scratching across paper, and somehow that sound made it all more real. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Mrs. Morrison, based on what you're telling me, there are several concerning patterns here. I'm going to need you to gather some documents, bank statements, account agreements, any paperwork related to these transfers. Can you do that?" "I think so, but I'll have to be careful. If Richard finds out I'm looking into this." "Has he ever threatened you? Physically, I mean." "No, never. He's not violent, he's controlling?" The word settled over me like a weighted blanket. "Yes. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to understand something. Financial abuse is real abuse. It's a way of maintaining power and control over someone by limiting their access to economic resources. And from what you're telling me, you're experiencing a textbook case of it." After we hung up, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, where I'd driven to make the call in private, and I cried. Not pretty crying, ugly, gut-wrenching sobs that made my whole body shake. Because admitting it made it real, and making it real meant I had to do something about it. The hardest part about waking up is that you can't go back to sleep. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And I was seeing things everywhere now. I noticed how Richard would casually redirect conversations when I brought up money, how he'd pat my hand and say, "Don't worry about the details, Elle. That's what I'm here for." That patronizing pat, like I was a child who needed reassurance instead of a partner who deserved answers. I noticed how my kids would exchange looks when I mentioned wanting to travel, like it was cute that I still had dreams at my age, like hoping to see Paris or take a cruise was some adorable quirk instead of a legitimate desire. I noticed how holidays had become performances, everyone playing their parts, devoted family, loving children, grateful mother. All of it choreographed to maintain an illusion that was crumbling faster every day. That Sunday, I did something I never did. I said no. Michael called asking me to babysit his kids so he and his wife could go to a concert. Usually, I'd drop everything. This time, I said I had plans. "What plans?" he asked, sounding almost offended that I might have a life outside of serving the family. "Just plans, Michael." "Mom, we really need this. We bought the tickets months ago." There was an edge in his voice, irritation barely concealed. "Then you should have asked me months ago. I'm not available." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, "You're being really selfish right now. You know that, right?" I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I hung up. Selfish. I'd given them everything, and now I was selfish for wanting one Sunday to myself. The phone rang again immediately, Jennifer this time. "Mom, Michael just called. What's going on with you?" "Nothing's going on. I'm not available to babysit, that's all." "Are you mad at us? Because you've been acting really weird lately." "Weird how?" "I don't know. Distant. Like you don't want to be part of the family anymore." I almost laughed. Almost. "Jennifer, when's the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for money or a favor, just to see how I was doing?" Silence. That's what I thought. Mom, that's not fair. We're all busy. You know we love you. Do you? Or do you love what I can do for you? I can't believe you're saying this. After everything we've been through together, after how close we've always been, you're going to accuse us of not loving you? I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just asking a question. She hung up on me. My own daughter hung up on me. And you know what? I felt relief. Because for the first time in my adult life, I'd told the truth instead of swallowing it to keep the peace. That night, Richard finally came home at a reasonable hour. He found me in the living room, reading a book, just sitting there, not cooking, not cleaning, not doing anything productive, just existing. Elle, you okay? I'm fine. You don't seem fine. The kids called. They're worried about you. Are they worried about me or worried about losing their ATM? He froze. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired, Richard. I'm tired of being taken for granted. I'm tired of sacrificing everything while everyone else builds their lives on top of my bones. That's dramatic, even for you, even for me. Like having feelings was a character flaw. I want to see the business accounts, I said. Why? Because half of that business was built with my money, my inheritance, my retirement. I have a right to know where it went. You signed off on everything. You agreed to all of it. I trusted you. There's a difference. He sat down across from me, and I watched him transform. The irritation melted into concern, the defensiveness into gentle patience. It was a performance I'd seen 1,000 times, and I'd always believed it before. But now I could see the calculation behind it, the careful manipulation of his expression and tone. Elle, honey, I know things have been stressful. Maybe you should talk to someone. Dr. Miller, maybe. You seem anxious lately, and at your age, hormones can really affect your mood. At my age, my mood, hormones. He was making me doubt my own sanity, and he was doing it with a smile on his face and love in his voice. That's when I knew I couldn't stay in this house another day. Not safely, not sanely. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while, I said. Your sister in Virginia? Elle, that's ridiculous. Over what? A disagreement about bank accounts? It's not a disagreement, Richard, and it's not just about money. It's about respect. It's about truth. It's about whether I'm a partner in this marriage or just a convenient servant. You're being hysterical. I'm leaving in the morning. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. And if I say no, if I say you're not going anywhere, the threat hung in the air between us, not physical, but real nonetheless. Then I'll know everything I need to know about who you really are. I went upstairs and packed a bag, my whole body trembling. When I came back down, he was on the phone in his office, door closed, voice urgent. I stood outside that door one more time, and I heard him say, "She knows something. We need to move faster." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about money or control. This was something bigger, something I hadn't even begun to understand. But I was going to find out, even if it destroyed me. I left at dawn the next morning while Richard was still asleep. Or pretending to be asleep. I honestly couldn't tell anymore which version of him was real and which was performance. My sister Karen lived 4 hours away in Richmond, in a small brick house with a garden full of roses that she tended with the same care I used to put into my family. Used to, past tense. That's what my life had become, a collection of things I used to do, used to be, used to believe. Elle, what happened? She asked when she opened the door and saw my face. I collapsed into her arms and cried for the second time in as many days. When I could finally speak, I told her everything. About the money, the manipulation, the growing sense that my entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. Karen listened, her face getting harder with each detail. When I finished, she said something that shocked me. I tried to tell you, years ago, remember at Mom's funeral when I said Richard was controlling? You stopped speaking to me for 6 months. I did remember. I'd been so angry at her for criticizing my husband during such a difficult time. I'd called her jealous, bitter, unable to understand what a real marriage looked like. The memory made me cringe now, seeing how blind I'd been, how defensive. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't apologize. Just tell me what you need." What did I need? I'd spent so long meeting everyone else's needs that I didn't even know what mine were anymore. I need to understand what they did with my money. I need to protect what's left, and I need to figure out who I am when I'm not being someone's mother or wife. Then that's what we'll do. Over the next few days, I worked with Diana Chen to gather evidence. It was harder than I expected because I'd been so trusting, so willing to sign anything Richard put in front of me. But we pieced it together, document by document, transaction by transaction. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Richard had been systematically moving money into accounts I had no access to. The business that I'd helped fund, that carried both our names, was now solely in his name. He'd refinanced our house without telling me, pulling out equity and putting it into investments I'd never heard of. My retirement fund hadn't just been depleted. It had been completely drained and closed. The inheritance from my parents, the last bit of security I thought I had been transferred into a trust where I was listed as a beneficiary but had no control. And the other beneficiaries were Richard and the kids. They'd carved me out of my own financial life so carefully, so completely, that I was essentially penniless except for the one account they didn't know about. How could I have been so stupid? I asked Diana during one of our meetings. You weren't stupid. You were trusting, and they exploited that trust systematically. This is what financial abusers do. They isolate you from your own resources while making you feel like you're being included in decisions. I thought about all those papers I'd signed, Richard's patient explanations that this was just paperwork and standard business practice, how he'd made me feel like I was being difficult when I asked questions, how he'd praised me for being so supportive when I signed without reading. Research shows that 1 in 5 nursing home residents was neglected at least once per year. Hearing that statistic, I understood I was experiencing a form of elder abuse, even though I wasn't in a nursing home. The mechanisms were the same: isolate, exploit, gaslight, repeat. What are my options? I asked. Diana laid them out. I could file for divorce and try to reclaim my assets. I could pursue criminal charges for financial exploitation. I could do both. Or I could try to negotiate with Richard directly. But Eleanor, you need to understand something. People who do this don't just see the error of their ways and give you back your money. They fight, they lie, they make you look crazy. You need to be prepared for that. I thought I was prepared. I had no idea what was coming. The first sign was when my credit cards were declined. All of them, in the same day. I was at the grocery store trying to buy basic supplies when the cashier gave me that pitying look. "Ma'am, this card has been canceled." I tried another. Same result. I went to the ATM. My account, the one with my remaining $30,000, showed a balance of 0. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone as I called the bank. "Mrs. Morrison, your husband came in yesterday with proper authorization and closed the account. The funds were transferred to your joint account." "What joint account? I don't have a joint account with him." "According to our records, you do. It was opened 3 months ago." I hadn't opened any account 3 months ago, but I'd signed so many things over the years. Who knew what documents I'd approved without understanding what they really meant? I called Diana immediately. She was calm but firm. "This is illegal. Even if you signed something, he can't just drain your accounts without notice. We're filing an emergency motion to freeze all assets. Today." But before we could, the bombs started falling. That afternoon, I got a call from Adult Protective Services. Someone had filed a report claiming I was mentally unfit, possibly experiencing dementia, and that I'd been making false accusations against my family. Then my doctor's office called. Apparently, Richard had contacted them expressing concern about my mental state, asking if there were signs of cognitive decline. Then Jennifer called, her voice dripping with false concern. "Mom, Dad told us you've been having some problems, forgetting things, getting confused. We're really worried about you. Maybe you should come home so we can take care of you." I could hear it in her voice, the script she'd been given, the performance. "I'm not confused, Jennifer. I'm just finally seeing clearly." "See? That's exactly what Dad said you'd say. Mom, please, we just want to help you. If you wanted to help me, you would have stopped him from stealing my life savings." "Stealing? Mom, that's crazy. Dad would never. You're not making sense. This is exactly why we're worried." I hung up. My whole body was shaking. They were trying to make me look incompetent. If they succeeded, they could take control of everything, including me. Diana moved fast. Within 24 hours, we had an emergency hearing scheduled. We had evidence of the financial transfers, proof that I was mentally competent, documentation of the systematic exploitation. But I wasn't prepared for what happened when I showed up at that courthouse. My entire family was there. Richard, all 3 kids, even my grandchildren. They'd brought them to make me look like the villain who was tearing the family apart. Michael stood up when he saw me. "Mom, please, don't do this. Whatever you think is happening, we can work it out at home. You don't need lawyers and courts. We're family." "Then why did you help him steal from me?" "Steal? Mom, we invested in the family business. We've all been working together to build something for the future. Your future, too." "Show me the accounts, then. Show me where my money is." He exchanged a look with Richard. "It's complicated. You wouldn't understand the business side of things." There it was. You wouldn't understand. Like I was a child who needed to be protected from grown-up conversations. Jennifer approached with tears in her eyes. "Mom, you're embarrassing us. All of us. The grandkids don't understand why Grandma is being so mean to Grandpa." Mean? I was being mean by wanting my own money back. Daniel didn't even look at me. He stood with his father, arms crossed, face cold. The hearing was brutal. Richard's lawyer painted me as a confused elderly woman who'd always been financially irresponsible, who'd consented to all these arrangements and now was suffering from age-related paranoia. But Diana was better. She had bank statements, transfer records, emails where Richard discussed managing Eleanor's concerns and keeping her out of the details. She had proof that I'd been systematically excluded from financial decisions while being made to think I was included. The judge listened to both sides, his face impassive. When it was over, he made a temporary ruling. All accounts would be frozen, pending a full investigation. Neither Richard nor I could access anything until the truth came out. I walked out of that courthouse feeling hollow. I'd won the first battle, but at what cost? My entire family stood on the courthouse steps, glaring at me like I was a traitor. Richard approached me as I headed to my car. "I hope you're happy, Eleanor. You've destroyed this family." "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped letting you destroy me. The kids will never forgive you for this." And there it was, the threat disguised as a prediction. Choose them or choose yourself. But you can't have both. I drove back to Karen's house and slept for 12 hours straight. When I woke up, I had 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. None of them were asking if I was okay. All of them were telling me I was wrong. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I didn't care. Because being wrong and free was better than being right and enslaved. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of detailed forensic accounting, of depositions, of watching my family's lawyer try to paint me as mentally incompetent while Diana systematically destroyed their narrative. The evidence was overwhelming. Over the past 7 years, Richard had transferred nearly $600,000 out of my accounts. Some of it went to business investments that only his name was on. Some went to the kids for their homes, their businesses, their lives. None of it was coming back. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the messages Diana found during discovery. Group text threads between Richard and the kids, dating back years, discussing how to manage Mom and keep her from interfering in their plans. Jokes about my cooking and my volunteer work, calling me naive and simple-minded. Strategies for keeping me happy and distracted while they made the real decisions. One text from Michael read, "Just keep complimenting her pot roast and she'll sign anything." Jennifer had responded with a laughing emoji. Daniel had written, "Works every time. Mom's so easy." I read those messages in Diana's office, and I felt something inside me die. Not my heart. That had already been broken. Something deeper. The part of me that still believed in the fundamental goodness of the people I loved. "I'm sorry you had to see those," Diana said quietly. I needed to see them. I needed to know the truth. And I did. As much as it hurt, as much as it destroyed the last remnants of my illusions, I needed to know exactly who these people were when they thought I couldn't hear them. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. I wore a navy suit that Karen helped me pick out, and I walked into that courtroom with my head high. Richard's entire strategy was character assassination. His lawyer brought up every mistake I'd made in 40 years, the time I accidentally bounced a check, the credit card I'd forgotten to pay off 1 month, my emotional instability when I'd had postpartum depression after Jennifer was born. They tried to make my entire life look like evidence of incompetence. But Diana was ready. She brought in my former supervisor from the hospital who testified about my 30 years of managing complex medical situations. She had my financial advisor who confirmed that before Richard took over our finances, I'd been meticulous about saving and planning. And then she brought in Mrs. Patterson. "I've known Eleanor Morrison for 3 years through our work at the community center," Mrs. Patterson testified. "I've watched her organize complex meal delivery routes, manage budgets, and coordinate volunteers. She's one of the sharpest, most capable women I've ever met. But I've also watched her become increasingly withdrawn over the past year, making excuses for her family, blaming herself for their neglect. What I witnessed wasn't cognitive decline. It was systematic emotional abuse." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Then it was my turn to testify. I stood in front of that judge with my husband and children staring at me like I was a stranger, and I told my story. All of it. The slow erosion of my identity, the financial manipulation, the gaslighting, the isolation. Richard's lawyer tried to trip me up, asking detailed questions about specific dates and transactions, clearly hoping I'd get confused and prove their incompetence narrative. But I didn't. I had every date, every amount, every detail memorized, because while they'd been plotting against me, I'd been doing my homework. The judge took a brief recess to review the evidence. When he came back, his face was grim. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "I've reviewed the financial records, the communications between you and your children, and the testimony presented today. What I see is a clear pattern of financial exploitation of a vulnerable person. Your Honor, my wife consented to all of these transactions. Consent obtained through deception and manipulation is not valid consent. You systematically isolated Mrs. Morrison from her own financial resources while maintaining the illusion that she was an equal partner in these decisions. That's not just unethical, it's illegal." The judge ordered Richard to return every penny he'd taken from my accounts. He ordered the business to be evaluated and my fair share paid out. He ordered the house sold and the proceeds divided equally. And then he did something I hadn't expected. He referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. Richard's face went white. Jennifer started crying. Michael looked like he'd been punched. "But Your Honor," Richard's lawyer protested, "Mr. Morrison had no criminal intent. This was a family matter that got complicated. This was systematic financial abuse of an elder family member. That's a crime in this state. Whether the district attorney chooses to pursue charges is up to them, but based on what I've seen here today, there's more than enough evidence to support a criminal case." When the gavel came down, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months, maybe years. Outside the courthouse, Richard tried to approach me one last time. "Eleanor, please. Don't let them press charges. Think about the kids, the grandkids. This will destroy our family." I looked at him. This man I'd loved for 40 years, and I felt nothing but pity. "You destroyed our family the moment you decided I was worth more to you as a resource than as a person. You did this, not me. I gave you everything. A beautiful home, a comfortable life, security. You gave me a cage and called it a gift. And I was so grateful for the cage that I forgot I was supposed to fly." Jennifer ran up, mascara streaming down her face. "Mom, please. Dad made mistakes, but we all did. We all went along with it. We're sorry. Isn't that enough? Are you sorry, or are you sorry you got caught?" She didn't answer, couldn't answer. "I want you to understand something," I said, loud enough for all of them to hear. "I don't hate you. I don't even blame you, really. I blame myself for teaching you that my worth was measured in what I could provide instead of who I am. I showed you how to use me, and you learned the lesson perfectly." "So what now?" Michael asked. "You're just going to walk away from us? From your grandchildren?" "I'm walking toward myself. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing me. If you can't respect that, then yes, I'm walking away." I got in my car, where Karen was waiting, and I drove away from that courthouse. In my rearview mirror, I could see my family standing there, looking lost and angry and confused. And you know what I felt? Free. The district attorney did press charges. Richard was indicted on 3 counts of elder financial exploitation. The trial took 4 months, and I testified at every hearing. It was brutal, watching him try to paint himself as a loving husband who'd made innocent mistakes, watching my children support him, watching the family I'd built turn against me completely. But I wasn't alone anymore. Mrs. Patterson came to every court date, sitting in the back row, her presence a reminder that I had worth beyond what I could provide for my biological family. Karen never left my side. Diana fought for me like I was her own mother. During those 4 months, something remarkable happened. Other women started reaching out to me. Women who'd read about my case in the local paper, women who recognized their own stories in mine. They'd call Diana's office, asking if they could speak to me, asking if what happened to me was happening to them too. One woman, Margaret, was 74 years old. Her son had convinced her to sign over her house to him for tax purposes. Another, Susan, had her daughter-in-law systematically emptying her accounts while telling her it was for investment opportunities. There was Rita, whose entire family had been borrowing money for years, always promising to pay it back, never following through. They all had the same look in their eyes, that mixture of shame and confusion and desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't crazy. That maybe what was happening to them wasn't normal, that maybe they deserved better. I met with them whenever I could, in coffee shops, in Diana's office, in the community center where Mrs. Patterson had first seen through my carefully constructed facade. And I told them what I'd learned, that love shouldn't cost you everything, that family doesn't entitle anyone to your resources, that it's never too late to protect yourself, and slowly, painfully, I started to build a new life. Richard was ultimately convicted on 2 counts and sentenced to 3 years of probation, restitution, and community service. No jail time, which felt like a slap in the face at first. But Diana explained that elder financial abuse convictions were rare, and even this limited sentence was a victory. "You're setting a precedent," she said. "Other women in your situation will be able to point to your case and say, 'This happened. This is real. This is punishable.'" The financial settlement was better than the criminal case. Richard had to repay every dollar with interest. The business was evaluated at $2 million, and I received half. The house sold for $600,000, split down the middle. After legal fees and taxes, I walked away with over $1 million. More money than I'd ever had in my life, all of it mine, all of it secure in accounts only I could access. But the money wasn't the victory. The money was just a tool for building something new, something real. 3 months after the final settlement, I was standing in the kitchen of my new condo in Richmond, looking out at the city skyline as the sun rose. It was a modest place. Nothing like the house I'd left behind, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every dish in the cabinet, every painting on the wall I'd chosen. Not because Richard liked it, not because it matched some image of what a family home should look like, but because I liked it. The condo had 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and windows that faced east, flooding the space with morning light. I'd painted the walls a soft cream color that reminded me of the beach. I'd bought furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive, art that spoke to me rather than art that looked expensive. There was a small balcony where I kept potted herbs and flowers, tending them each morning with my coffee. This space didn't have decades of memories embedded in every corner. It didn't echo with the voices of children or the laughter of family gatherings. And that was exactly what I needed. A blank canvas, a place where I could discover who Eleanor was when she wasn't performing the role of dutiful wife and self-sacrificing mother. I'd started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping abuse survivors navigate the financial aspects of leaving dangerous situations. The first time I sat across from a woman who was afraid to leave because she had no money, no credit, no resources, I saw myself. And I knew exactly what to tell her. You're worth more than what you can provide. Your value isn't measured in service or sacrifice, and leaving doesn't make you selfish. It makes you smart. Her name was Christina, and she was 32 years old with 2 young children. Her husband had controlled every penny, made her account for every purchase, convinced her she was too stupid to manage money on her own. She sat across from me, hands twisted in her lap, tears streaming down her face. But where will I go? How will I support my kids? I haven't worked in 8 years. I don't have any skills. I took her hands in mine. You have the most important skill. You're willing to fight for a better life. Everything else we can figure out. There are resources, programs, people who want to help. But first, you have to believe you deserve help. It was the same conversation I'd had with myself 3 months earlier. The same doubts, the same fears, the same paralysis that comes from years of being told you're not enough. Mrs. Patterson and I had lunch every Thursday. She introduced me to her book club, her gardening group, her friends from church. Slowly, I was building a community that saw me as Eleanor, not as someone's wife or mother. Karen and I took a trip to Maine that fall, something I'd wanted to do for 30 years. We stayed in bed and breakfasts, ate lobster rolls, watched the waves crash against the rocky shore. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for pleasure, just for me. "You seem different," Karen said one morning as we sat on a bench overlooking the ocean. "I am different. I'm becoming who I was supposed to be before I lost myself in other people's needs." "Do you miss them? The kids?" I thought about that carefully. I miss who I thought they were. I miss the family I believed we were, but I don't miss the reality of it. The constant anxiety, the feeling of never being enough, the exhaustion of performing love that wasn't real. "Have they tried to contact you?" Jennifer sends me texts sometimes, usually when she needs something. Then she remembers she's supposed to be mad at me and stops responding. Michael sent a birthday card with no message inside. Daniel hasn't reached out at all. I'm sorry. I'm not. Not anymore. They had a choice. They could have chosen integrity and love. They chose money and complicity. That tells me everything I need to know about who they really are. The ocean crashed against the rocks below us, relentless and powerful. I felt like that ocean, washing away years of sediment to reveal the stone underneath. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mom, it's Jennifer. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time. Karen watched me, waiting. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing. Not yet. Maybe not ever." She knows where I am if she really wants to talk. But I'm not going to drop everything and run to her anymore. Those days are over. I turned off my phone and went back to watching the waves. For the first time in my life, my peace was more important than their comfort. And that felt like coming home. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something I wish someone had told me decades ago. What I experienced wasn't just family dysfunction or complicated relationships. It was a form of abuse that experts call intergenerational financial exploitation. And it's more common than you might think. Here's what I've learned. This kind of abuse often starts with a belief system that gets passed down through families. The idea that women, especially mothers, should sacrifice endlessly, that our worth is measured in service, that asking for anything for ourselves is selfish. My mother believed this, her mother believed this, and I taught it to my daughter without even realizing it. The cycle continues until someone breaks it. Financial exploitation in families often follows a pattern. First, the abuser establishes trust by being exceptionally caring and attentive. You feel valued and loved. Then gradually, they begin making financial decisions for your own good. They convince you to sign documents, transfer funds, make them joint account holders, all of it framed as protecting you or helping the family. By the time you realize what's happening, you've been systematically separated from your financial resources. And when you try to object, they make you doubt your own judgment. They call you confused, paranoid, selfish. They use your love for them as a weapon against you. The statistics are staggering. Research shows that family members commit about 90% of elder financial abuse. Not strangers, not scammers, family. And here's what really matters. This kind of abuse doesn't just affect the immediate victim. It creates trauma that ripples through generations. My grandchildren are learning right now that exploitation is acceptable if it's done by people who claim to love you. That money matters more than integrity. That women exist to serve and sacrifice. Unless something changes, they'll repeat these patterns with their own families. So what can you do if you see yourself in my story, or if you suspect someone you love is experiencing this? First, understand that financial abuse is real abuse. It's not just a disagreement about money. It's a form of control that can be just as damaging as physical violence. Second, protect your assets. Have accounts that only you can access. Know where your money is and where it's going. Don't sign anything you haven't read thoroughly, no matter who's asking. Third, document everything. Keep copies of bank statements, account agreements, transfers. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Trust your gut. Fourth, know your rights. Most states have laws against elder financial exploitation. You can report it to Adult Protective Services, the police, or a lawyer who specializes in elder law. Fifth, build a support system outside your family. Friends, community groups, professionals who can give you objective perspective. Isolation is a tool of abuse. Connection is a tool of survival. And finally, understand that leaving or confronting this kind of abuse doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a strong person. Your first responsibility is to yourself, not to people who are exploiting you, even if they share your DNA. I spent 37 years believing that sacrifice was the same as love, that giving until I had nothing left was noble and right. I was wrong. Real love doesn't exploit. Real love doesn't manipulate. Real love doesn't systematically drain you of your resources and dignity while making you feel grateful for the privilege. Real love sees you as a whole person with needs and dreams and value that exists independently of what you can provide. If the people in your life can't offer you that kind of love, then they don't deserve your sacrifice. And you deserve so much more than a life spent serving people who see you as a resource instead of a person. Break the cycle. Protect yourself. Choose you. because your worth isn't measured in what you give up. It's inherent in who you are. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it was long and probably painful to hear in places. But if even one person hears this and recognizes themselves, if even one person finds the courage to protect themselves or leave a situation that's destroying them, then sharing my truth was worth it. I want to know where you're listening from. Are you in your car, driving home from work? In your kitchen, making dinner? Lying in bed, unable to sleep because something in your own life feels wrong? Drop a comment and tell me what city you're in, what time it is there. Let me know I'm not alone in this, because I spent so many years feeling isolated, thinking I was the only one experiencing this kind of pain. I know now that I wasn't alone then, and you're not alone now. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps other people who need to hear this find their way here. And subscribe to the channel because I'll be sharing more stories like this. Real stories about real people navigating the messy, complicated, sometimes devastating reality of family relationships. I want to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Would you have left sooner? Fought harder? Tried to reconcile? There's no wrong answer. Every person's situation is unique, and every person's choice is valid. If you found this story helpful, I have 2 other videos I think you might connect with. One is about recognizing the warning signs of manipulation in relationships. The other is about rebuilding your identity after leaving an abusive situation. Both are linked below. And if you're in a situation like mine was, if you're experiencing financial abuse or any kind of exploitation, please reach out for help. Contact your local adult protective services. Talk to a lawyer. Tell someone you trust. You don't have to carry this alone. Until the next story, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and remember that choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival.